that, we will have a look at how this knowledge area is again related to the others. So you can see this is, keep this in your mind, because this is actually kind of a map of how the 6 knowledge areas are interrelated and interlinked to one another. So you talk about, we started off with the business analysis, planning and monitoring. We understood that it has got some relation to elicitation collaboration, because we then moved from there. We planned for the elicitation, we prepared, conducted elicitation. From there, we actually again linked to the, that's again linked to the requirement lifecycle management through the BA planning and monitoring. And this again, this activity or this knowledge area again is linked to the requirement analysis and design definition, then the solution evaluation directly, and then also obviously, as we discussed, there should be other lines to come through. So each of them kind of crisscrosses and interconnects with each other. So before we actually delve deeper into this, let's have a quick discussion in terms of what requirements really are. So some people call it as requirements, some people call it as specification, some people call it as features. So what really is requirement basically is in fact, for any project, for any initiative, anything that you want to develop or work, this is the kind of spinal cord. This forms the basis for the foundation for any piece of work that we engage. And when you try and understand the requirement correctly and clearly, and you communicate that and make sure that all the stakeholders, the team members involved have a good understanding of the requirements, that itself contributes to the success of the project or initiative. So people call it as criteria, functions, goals, aims, rules, regulations, features, objectives, needs, risks, opportunities, assumptions, constraints. All of these challenges, all of the business rules, all of these together could actually be termed into one word, and that's called requirements. So there's no clear definition. Obviously, requirement means that which is according to the quality initiatives, which says that it is the feature or the quality of the product that needs to be met as you promised. So if you do not do that, then the requirement is not fulfilled. It's very important that we understand that in that context. This actually brings you, I mean, we discussed this in the other course as well, so I don't want to delve deeper on this, but requirements back in those days in the traditional waterfall type of projects were basically the functional requirement specification, the BRD, business requirements document, software requirement specification, the MRD, market requirements document, URD, user requirements document, so on and so forth. When 500, 600, 1,000 pages of documents used to be the guiding factors for how the project would shape up. We used to spend a good 4-5 months to write up the requirements, to do meetings with the stakeholders, come back and write the requirements, get their approval. Once they're signed off, and frozen requirements would form the basis for the next step, which is architecture and all that. But fast forward that to the agile mode, which is what we are working on now. Now requirements are in different shapes, sizes, and forms. So it's not just, so you've got user stories, you've got models, you've got personas, prototypes, wireframes, all of these, the backlogs, all of these are essentially what we have at the moment to kind of say that this is, we are managing the requirements. It's not just what you write in the user story as a requirement. It's all, perhaps even the technical tasks that you manage to create, the change requests, the tasks, the technical tasks, the defects, all of them are potentially what you're trying to manage within the agile development. So essentially that's what is what we meant by the requirements in transformation from the traditional waterfall to the agile mode. So what is our role as BAs in this whole thing? So we need to act as a bridge between the problem space, which is where the needs, the opportunities, the customers, the users are there. So we as BAs need to act as a bridge between the problem space, which is where the opportunities, the needs, the customers, the users, all of these operate, to the solution space, which is where the specific offering, the implementation, the solution to this problem, set of problems, the opportunities that we have. It could be a product, it could be in the form of an application, it could be in the form of a process that is improved. Everything is basically the solution space. And we as BAs, we're trying to bridge this gap between the problem and the solution. And so we are managing, we are bridging the gap between different stakeholders, between different teams, different customers, suppliers, users, team members, senior management, quality people, project managers, all of these. We are going to be the communication channel. We are the bridge between or amongst all these different stakeholders. And we would be responsible for making sure that the requirements are collected, they're elicited, they're created, they're specified, they're managed, they're communicated, and they're maintained well, right? So that's our, and they're prioritized as well. So that's the core responsibility of business analysts. But is it just that, or is it much more? Yeah, of course. With agile context, it's much more. We are actually owning the product. We are semi-product owners, so we work actively with the product owners, with the customers, with the users, trying to understand what are the needs, again, trying to define the problem space, and then we'll help the team to get to the solution space. We'll work with the team, we'll enable the team, we facilitate the team members and the stakeholders in coming up with a solution. We evaluate, we recommend, we compare, and we contrast the different solution options, and then we come up with one solution or a few solutions that would actually help address the problems that we have identified. So that's going to be our role. And for that, we need to understand the requirements. So that is important, not just by the business sponsors, the subject matter experts, or stakeholders, or customers. So all of them, wherever the requirements could potentially come from, we need to be able to understand. We need to be able to identify the requirements. We need to specify them in the way that the team can understand, and we need to communicate them back in a way that the team can understand and start working in phrasing a solution, in creating a solution or a set of solutions to address those problem states. And we also need to communicate the understanding to the team members and stakeholders back, perhaps saying that this is update, this is what we're working on. So as BAs, we are responsible for this set of all the requirements and go beyond just the requirement definition and requirement understanding. So when we talk about this in that context, in terms of what is a good requirement, I've created this to help you. Maybe I can share with you the video that is created to help with this one. So a good requirement is basically one that is current, that is kept up to date, not something that you have developed and something that was written about 5 years ago. So it's not relevant anymore because the world would have changed from then on to now. The technologies would have changed, the lifestyles, the people's needs, the organization, the customers, the whole business would have changed in terms of the ownership of the business. So requirements have to be kept current, and that's important. A good requirement is current, it's concise, it's very precise. It's not the long-winding 1,000-page document. Nowadays, we have got requirements which are written on the back of user story card, right? So that's what we're calling as user story. One-liner. As a user role, I wish to do this so that I get this benefit. Simple, very easy to write and concise. And it's conformant to what is it conforming to? It's conforming to the standards, it's conforming to the expectations, is conforming to the regulations of whatever that particular industry is, the domain and the organization standards and everything else. It should be correct. It should be correct. It should not be something that is leading you into the wrong path. It should be correct. It should be consistent with what you have accepted as the standard way of doing or the industry standard or the way that you have as ways of working, agile ways of working, as we discussed in the other course. It should be consistent with those practices, with those behaviors, and with those standards. It should be complete in its own, right? So when I say user story, as we discussed before, it's a invest principle, right? So independent, it's independent, but it's not just independent. It should be able to pick it up and compare and contrast and negotiate with other such story. So in the place of that, can I use this? Yes, I can. Yes. So it should be in a way that it is complete in itself. It is a self-contained unit so that people can actually, developers can actually refer to this and then they can develop this just on its own without having to worry about what are the other touch points and things like that. So it should be independent, negotiable, and it should be delivering value to the users and the customers and the business. It should be estimatable. It should be sizable. It should be small enough to be able to estimate and to be able to develop. not big enough to be able to be fit into a backlog in terms of user story. And then it should be testable, right? You should be able to test it. So all of this and validate the requirement. And then it should be cohesive as well. It should make sense. It should have its own set of things where it can fit in. It can fit into a backlog, and it's like an atom principle, right? Atomic, just an atomic principle of how an atom could fit in into a molecule and other atoms in terms of structures. You should be able to categorize that, whether it's a functional requirement, whether it is a non-functional requirement, it's a security requirement, it's this admin requirement, or a core user requirement, or is it usability requirement, or is it performance, reliability, scalability, whatever the kind of category is. So you should be able to actually say, just by looking at that, you should be saying, yeah, this is correct type, so it's a functional requirement. Clear and understandable. It should be clear. It should be written in a way that anybody who reads it is able to understand. That's why, again, I'm going back to the user stories, because it's very popular way of writing requirements, because of the fact that it is sticking to all these, it is ticking all these boxes. And then in terms of feasibility, it should be feasible. As in, a requirement shouldn't be like a dream. As in, it should be written in a way that it can actually be with little. Of course, it is not something that it can be done with a stroke of a pencil, but you should be able to work on that, to develop, and in the lines of whatever you've agreed upon with the tools and technologies that you have decided to use. It should be able to be created. It should be done, with effort, even if it is without, not easily, but even if you put some effort, it should be able to develop. It should not be a mission impossible thing. And then it should be relevant to the current set of things. You can't just put 100 things into a basket and say, yeah, these are all relevant stuff, these are the requirements, because they may not be related to each other. It should be owned. Somebody should own the requirement. When you say requirements owner, ownership could be in terms of not just the BA. BA is obviously the requirement. The business analyst owns the requirements, but then who gave the requirements? Who is is it the business? Is the technology within business? Who is the person who is actually, who is going to carry it forward? Who would make sure that this is actually into the product and from there on the customers, right? Traceability should be traceable back and forth, as we discussed. It from amongst all those requirements, and then the architecture elements, the designs and everything. It should be independent, implementation independent. It's independent of technology, independent of platform. That's a very, very important thing that you need to know. That a requirement should be not depending on Oracle or SQL or Java or anything. It is independent. That's what we discussed. It is in the problem space, right? Because requirements are in the problem space, they're technology agnostic, they're platform independent, they're independent of underlying tools or anything. But whereas design, development are platform specific, the technology specific, that's a solution space. So requirements are always in the problem space. They're defining the problem or the opportunity or the need, whatever you call it as. Unambiguous, very important. Unique, it should be unique. You should be able to actually give something and then refer to the head. I'm talking about that specific requirement, which you should also be able to refer to. There should not be any confusion around what I'm talking that no, you cannot map to, you cannot understand. Then modifiable, testable, testability, and we discussed this. Modifiable, very important to maintain the requirement later. It's not just written in stone. It should be in a way that can be changed later if required. So I thought it's very important for you to understand this in the context of requirements, because people don't use the term requirement very loosely, and they don't understand what really makes a good requirement. So I created this one for your benefit. You can create, if you want, I can share the video of this later. So requirements lifecycle. So beginning with the business need being expressed as a requirement of the vision or the mission of what we are trying to do. From there on, the requirements would be identified in terms of the tactical and the operational aspects. And that would then be slowly leading into the solution creation. And then once we have the solution, we have got the product. It goes through different stages. It goes through the life cycle of the product, being adoption, and then it would, early adopter, late adapter, and then all these other things that we discussed in the context of a product life cycle, and then early majority, late majority, and then it goes through to the retirement in terms of the end of the product line. So That's the typical way that we look at products. But then obviously that doesn't mean everything has got to go through that stage. But essentially, even the requirements go through those kind of life cycles. So you start with the assessment, and that's where once we assess a requirement, we analyze it, and we say a go or no go decision. So that's where we create a business case for the requirement, for the high level vision of whatever, for the idea, the concept. Once we take a go no go decision in terms of the feasibility, the usability, desirability, and also all those entities that we talked about, quality of good quality and all that, we take a decision. Yes, this is feasible. This is viable in terms of the financial aspects. It is viable. It is desirable. People would definitely love to have this kind of a product, blah, 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 this feature. And then we should have a good usable design to it, blah, to make it presentable and all that. So we take a decision, yes, we go ahead with this one. And that's where the go comes in. After that, it would start getting into kind of, that becomes a requirement. And then that goes through all the stages of, as we discussed, tracing requirement, maintaining, prioritizing, and all that stuff, which we're going to discuss now. So that's potentially what we would do with the requirement lifecycle management. So let's have a quick look at the inputs, tasks, and outputs for this knowledge area as a whole. So obviously the inputs for this are the requirements. And sometimes even the designs would become a requirement of the high level architecture. Sometimes rough wireframes and your sketches and the mind maps, and all those things could become the inputs for the for your lifecycle management. And then the proposed changes in terms of the requests, the change requests, or any changes, any modifications, any edits that you do with requirements, all of those. And then the verified requirements, the validated requirements, the confirmed requirements, all would be part of the inputs for this lifecycle management. Then what do you do? What kind of activities and tasks do you do within this activity, the requirement lifecycle management? You trace requirements, you maintain the requirements, you then prioritize the requirements, assess the requirement in terms of the feasibility and all those things, and then you finally review and approve the requirement. Once you approve it, then you'll start perhaps to work on that, and then that goes into the product. And then validation, verification, all those testing of that requirement, whether we met the requirement in the first place or not. So all of these would follow. So what are the outputs for this knowledge area? The requirements and designs, obviously traced and validated and verified, maintained requirements and design, and then obviously prioritize requirement. That's what we do in the backlog, right? In the context of Agile, we've got a product backlog, which is the laundry list of all the items, all the requirements, all the tasks, technical tasks, features, everything goes in there, defects and everything. Then once you prioritize some of them and then say, well, this is the short list of the prioritized requirements, defects, and the changes and stuff like that, the technical tasks, items, that becomes your prioritized backlog, which is what we call as a sprint backlog. So that gets into the development of the particular feature within that time box called sprint. And then we have the change assessment, requirements and design as a process. We look at that. We look at what needs to be done, what has to be proposed, what needs to be improved as a process, as a product. And then we come up with the suggestions to improve the process or to improve the product and what can be done to get to that stage. So that's what we do as part of this knowledge area. And what activities do we have here? We've got the tracing of the requirements, maintain requirements, we've got prioritization of the requirements, look at assessment of the requirements, and finally we could approve the requirements. So these are the 5 activities that we do within this